Hey guys, Black Omen here. Welcome back to the channel. Originally, I wanted to do a rapid-fire review of albums that came out in 2020, but YouTube blocked most of the content in the video, so I guess even YouTube is like, bro, you don't want to look back at 2020. Trust me. So, I guess it's back to the old drawing board. So, here I am with my top 10 favorite RPGs. So, let's get into it. Number 10, Dragon Ball Z Legend of the Super Saiyan. This game never made it to the US unfortunately, but I think it would have been a pretty big hit. They have made a lot of Dragon Ball Z fighting games, but not a lot of RPGs, mainly on the Nintendo. But the SNES only got one DBZ RPG. This game could have been huge in the States had it come around in the peak of its popularity in the 90s. I first played this game when I was in middle school on an emulator, and I didn't get a translation pack until a couple years later. I just played a guessing game on what command was what. I knew the story from watching the series, so it was easy to follow along. Aside from the irritating music in the game, I find this to be very enjoyable for what it is. Number 9, Lufia and the Fortress of Doom. In the first of the Lufia series, even though there's 2 games in the series, I always felt like it needed a third, but hey, that's just me. This game takes place 79 years after the second Lufia title. The story of Lufia and the Fortress begins with an ancient prophecy of the Lufia world, with a massive floating island with a large castle located on it emerging into the sky one dark day. Dubbed the Fortress of Doom, this castle served as the base of operations for a group of all-powerful beings known as the Sinistrals, who plan to use their strength to bring the world to its knees. This game, let alone the series, is highly underrated, and I think it deserved more attention. These games, unlike most Final Fantasy games, have a small cast of characters in the main protagonist, which is nice since it's better to know a small cast of characters rather than worrying about leveling up 14 different characters and getting to know who they are and trying to remember what they do. To me, I just feel like this is much easier. Number 8, Lufia 2 Rise of the Sinistrals. This game is a prequel to Fortress of Doom, which takes place 99 years before the first game. It follows the story of the first main character's ancestor, Maxim, and explains the origins of the war between mankind and a group of gods called the Sinistrals. Lufia 2 made a number of changes from the first game. Dungeons no longer have random encounters. There are hundreds of puzzles throughout the game, ranging from simple to extremely challenging. It also introduced new skills, such as a variety of weapons that can be used to stun monsters or solve puzzles, and IP attacks. I like this one more than the first one because the puzzles in the dungeons made it more challenging. In 2010, Square Enix released a reimagining of the original title, titled Lufia, Curse of the Sinistrals. So I don't know if I consider it to be a third part of the series or not, but either way, I enjoy the second one more than the first. Number 7, Borderlands. Borderlands is a series of action role-playing first-person shooter video games in a space western science fantasy setting, created by Gearbox Software and published by 2K Games for multiple platforms. This series consists of 4 games, each with multiple downloadable content packs. Borderlands, Borderlands 2, Borderlands the pre-sequel, and Borderlands 3. The games in Borderlands primarily take place on the planet Pandora. Pandora is believed to be rich with mineral wealth, leading several interstellar megacorporations to send colony ships there to capitalize on it. But once they arrive, they find little of value outside the undecipherable alien artifacts from a long-extinct race known as the Arrogants, and numerous native life forms make it too dangerous. Many of the corporations abandon the planet, leaving behind their workforce, former prisoners coerced into employment, who take over much of the planet as bandits and raiders. However, A study of the alien artifacts leads to a discovery of mythical Eridan vaults filled with untold treasures and wealth, which are guarded by extremely powerful and ancient monsters. Corporations and military forces return to the planet, along with a number of vault hunters who seek to find the vaults themselves. The settings are expanded to include the moon of Pandora in Borderlands, the pre-sequel, and other planets in Borderlands 3. This was the first game series I played that was a combo of a first-person shooter RPG. This game had amazing elements and gameplay that gave it replayability with its multiple side quests they give you. Claptrap alone makes this game so much more fun, he's lovable, and he's a very helpful robot. The weapons in the game are just so badass and the characters are rather enjoyable. Number 6. Final Fantasy IV. This was the first Final Fantasy game I played growing up. This game was my introduction to the Final Fantasy series. The game's story follows Cecil, a dark knight, as he tries to prevent the sorcerer Golbez from seizing powerful crystals and destroying the world. He is joined on his quest by a frequently changing group of allies. Final Fantasy IV introduced innovations that became staples of the Final Fantasy series and role-playing games in general. Its active time battle system was used in 5 subsequent Final Fantasy games, and unlike prior games in the series, 4 gave each character its own unchangeable character class. This game was originally titled Final Fantasy II when it made it to America, because the actual Final Fantasy II and 3 never came to America, so since the first one came out on Nintendo, this one was released on the SNES, titled Final Fantasy II. This game has been remade multiple times over the years and was re-released on different platforms, including a sequel that was released on mobile called Final Fantasy IV: The After Years. I highly recommend this one to anyone who is a fan of RPGs. Number 5. Final Fantasy V. This was another game that never came to America back in the 90s. The game first appeared only in Japan on Nintendo's Super Famicom, known internationally as the Super Nintendo. It has been ported with minor differences to Sony's PlayStation and Nintendo's Game Boy Advance. An original video animation produced in 1994 called Final Fantasy: Legend of the Crystals serves as a sequel to the events depicted in the game. It was released for the PlayStation Network on April 6, 2011. In Japan, an enhanced port of the game with new high-resolution graphics and a touch-based interface was released for iPhone and iPad on March 28, 2013, and for Android September 25, 2013. The game begins as a wanderer named Bartz. In Japan, his name translates to Butts and was changed to Bart for obvious reasons, because nobody wants their main character to be associated with...
It's a butt.
Now, he investigates a fallen meteor. There, he encounters several characters, one of whom reveals the danger facing the 4 crystals that control the world's elements. These crystals act as a seal on Exodeth, an evil sorcerer. Bartz and his party must keep the crystals from being exploited by Exodeth's influence and prevent his resurgence. Final Fantasy V has been praised for the freedom of customization that the player has over the characters, achieved through the greatly expanded job system. Despite being only released in Japan, the Super Famicom's version sold more than 2 million copies. The PlayStation version has earned greatest hits status, selling more than 350,000 copies. This game, unlike most Final Fantasy games, only has 5 characters throughout the whole entire game, rather than a cavalcade of characters, which gives the game the unique touch and makes it easier to connect with the characters and invest in them. Number 4. Super Mario RPG: Legend of the 7 Stars. Super Mario RPG's story focuses on Mario and his friends as they seek to defeat Smithy, who has crashed into their world and stolen the 7 star pieces of Star Road. Super Mario RPG is the first RPG in the Mario franchise, drawing from major elements of Square's RPG franchises such as Final Fantasy. The main form of fighting enemies is turn-based combat with a party up to 3 characters. It is also the first game in the Mario franchise to have gameplay with an isometric 3D environment, allowing for a new variety of exploration and platforming elements reminiscent of the Super Mario series. Super Mario RPG was well received and particularly praised for its humor and 3D rendered graphics, and has been cited as one of the greatest video games of all time. It was followed by Paper Mario and Mario & Luigi series. Spiritual successors which maintain some gameplay elements. Super Mario RPG was released on the Wii console back in 2008, marking its debut in Europe and Australia, and later for the Wii U's Virtual Console in 2016. It was also included with the Super NES Classic Edition in 2017. When I heard that there was a sequel to this game back in the day, I was excited, but when I saw that it was Paper Mario, I was disappointed. To go from 3D to 2D is a bit of a step down for me, but I guess it is what it is. Number 3. Zeno Gears. Zeno Gears is a role-playing game developed by and published by Square for the PlayStation video game console. The debut entry in the larger Zeno franchise. It was released in Japan in February of 1998 and in North America in October of the same year. The gameplay of Zeno Gears revolves around navigating 3D environments both on foot and using humanoid mechs called gears. Combat is governed by a version of the turn-based active time battle system. The story follows protagonist Fei Fong Wong and several others as they journey across the world to overthrow the all-powerful rule of Solaris and uncover mysteries concerning their world. The story incorporates Jungian psychology, Freudian thought, and religious symbolism. Created by Tetsuya Takahashi and his wife Kaori Tanaka as a proposal for Final Fantasy VII, it was allowed to be developed as its own project, first as a sequel to Chrono Trigger, and then as an original game with science fiction premise. It was developed under the working title Project Noah. The characters and mechs were designed by Kunihiko Tanaka, whose designs were portrayed during in-game cinematics through the use of anime cutscenes. Due to time constraints and the team's general inexperience, the second half of the game's plot was primarily told through cutscenes. The game was almost not localized due to its religious content. Its localization was handled by Square Electronic Arts staff and translator Richard Honeywood, who described it as one of the most troublesome games of his career. The game received critical acclaim, with praise particularly going toward the storyline, gameplay, characters, and psychological and religious themes, but received criticism for its rushed pace of the second disc, due to a lack of gameplay and excessive narration. By 2003, the game had shipped 1.19 million copies worldwide, and has gained a cult following. While a direct sequel has not been developed, Takahashi would later found Monolith Soft and develop the Xenosaga Trilogy and Xenoblade Chronicles games as spiritual successors. Number 2. Final Fantasy VI, also known as Final Fantasy III. This is a role-playing game developed and published by Japanese company Square for the Super Nintendo. Final Fantasy VI is the 6th game in the Final Fantasy series, and the first to be directed by someone other than producer and series creator Hironobu Sakaguchi. The role was filled instead by Yashorni Chitsai and Hiroki Ito. Yoshitaka Amano, longtime collaborator to the Final Fantasy series, returned as the character designer and contributed widely to visual concept design. While series regular composer Nobuo Uematsu wrote the game's score, which has been released on several soundtrack albums. This game is set in a fantasy world with technology resembling that of the Second Industrial Revolution. The game's story follows an expanding cast that includes 14 permanent playable characters. The drama in this game includes depicting a rebellion against an evil military dictatorship, pursuit of a magical arms race, use of chemical weapons in warfare, depiction of violent apocalyptic confrontations with divinities, several personal redemption arcs, teenage pregnancy, and the continuous renewal of hope and life itself. Final Fantasy VI was released to critical acclaim and is seen as a landmark title for the role-playing genre. For instance, it was ranked as the second best RPG of all time by IGN in 2017. Its SNES and PlayStation versions have sold over 3.48 million copies worldwide to date as a standalone game, as well as 750,000 copies as part of the Japanese Final Fantasy Collection and the North American Final Fantasy Anthology. Final Fantasy VI has won numerous awards and is considered by many to be the greatest video game of all time. In 2017, Nintendo re-released Final Fantasy VI as part of the company's Super SNES Classic Edition. The game was known as Final Fantasy III when it was first released in North America, as the original Final Fantasy II and III and V had not been released outside Japan at the time, leaving Final Fantasy IV as the second title released outside Japan, and VI as the third. However, most later localizations use the original title. Instead of directly medieval fantasy settings featured in previous Final Fantasy titles, Final Fantasy VI is set in a world that has prominent steampunk influences. The structure of society is similar to that of the latter half of the 19th century, with opera and the fine arts serving as recurring motifs throughout the game, and a level of technology comparable to that of the Second Industrial Revolution. During the first half of the game, the planet is referred to as the World of Bound, and is divided into 3 lush continents. North continent is punctuated by a series of mountain ranges. The southern continent has been mostly subjugated by the cruel Istal Empire, and the eastern continent is the home of the Veld, a massive wilderness inhabited by monsters from all over the world. An apocalyptic event mid-game transforms the planet into the world of ruin. Its withering land masses are fractured into numerous islands surrounding a large continent. The game alludes to a conflict known as the War of Magi, which occurred 1,000 years prior to the beginning of the game. In the conflict, 3 quarreling entities known as the Warring Triad use innocent humans as soldiers by transforming them into enslaved magical beings called Espers. The Triad realized their wrongdoings. They freed the Espers and sealed their own powers inside 3 stone statues. As a precaution, the Espers sealed off both statues and themselves from the realm of humans. The concept of magic gradually faded to myth as mankind built a society extolling science and technology. At the game's opening, the Empire has taken advantage of the weakening barrier between the human and Esper domains, capturing several Espers in the process. Using these Espers as a power source, the Empire created Magitech, a craft that combines magic with machinery, including mechanical infantry, and infuses humans with magical powers. The Empire is opposed by a group of rebels called the Returners, seeking to free the subjugated lands. Before we get to the number 1 spot, let's take a look at the runners-up. Number 1, Chrono Trigger. I've talked about this game before in terms of the changes I would make to it. Chrono Trigger was a critical and had commercial success upon its release, and is frequently cited as one of the greatest video games of all time. Nintendo Power Magazine described the aspects of Chrono Trigger as revolutionary, including its multiple endings, plot-related side quests focusing on character development, unique battle system, and detailed graphics. Chrono Trigger was the third best-selling game of 1995 and in Japan, and shipped a total of 2.65 million copies worldwide by March of 2003. Square released a ported version by the company Toes in Japan for the PlayStation in 1999, which later repackaged with a Final Fantasy IV port as Final Fantasy Chronicles for the North American market. A slightly enhanced Chrono Trigger, again ported by the company Toes, was released for the Nintendo DS in North America and in Japan in 2008, and the PAL regions in 2009. The Nintendo DS version sold over 790,000 copies by March of 2009, after a year of sales. Chrono Trigger takes place in a world similar to Earth, with eras such as the prehistoric age, in which primitive humans and dinosaurs share the Earth, the Middle Ages, replete with knights, monsters, and magic, and the post-apocalyptic future, where distinct humans and sentient robots struggle to survive. The characters frequently travel through time to obtain allies, gather equipment, and learn information to help them in their quests. The party gains access to the end of time, represented by the Infinity Sign, which serves as a hub to travel back to other time periods. The party eventually acquires a time machine vehicle known as the Wings of Time, nicknamed the Epoch. The vehicle is capable of time travel between any time period without first having to travel to the end of time. Chrono Trigger's 6 playable characters, plus 1 optional one, comes from different eras of history. Chrono Trigger begins in year 1000 AD, with Chrono, Marl, and Luca. Chrono is the silent protagonist, characterized as a fearless young man who wields a katana in battle. Marl, revealed to be Princess Nadia, lives in the Guardia Castle. Though sheltered, at heart, she is a princess who seeks independence from her royal identity. Luca is the childhood friend of Chrono and a mechanical genius. Her home is filled with laboratory equipment and machinery. From the era of 2300 AD comes Robo, or Prometheus, designation R-66Y, a robot with near-human personality created to assist humans. Lying dormant in the future, Robo is found and repaired by Luca, and joins the group out of gratitude. The fiercely confident Ayla dwells from the time period of 65 million BC. Unmatched in her raw strength, Ayla is the chief of Ioka village and leads her people in a war against a species of humanoid reptiles known as the Reptites. The last 2 playable characters are Frog and Magus. Frog originated from 600 AD. He is a former squire, once known as Glenn. He was turned into an anthropomorphic frog by Magus, who also killed his friend Cyrus. Chivalrous but mired in regret, Frog dedicates his life to protecting the Queen of Guardia Castle and avenging Cyrus. Meanwhile, Guardia in 600 AD is in a state of conflict between the Mystics, a race of demons and intelligent animals who wage war against humanity under the leadership of Magus, a powerful sorcerer. Magus' seclusion conceals a long-lost past. He was formerly known as Janus, the young prince of the Kingdom of Zeal, which was destroyed by Lavos in 12,000 BC. The incident sent him forward through time, and as he ages, he plots revenge against Lavos and broods over the fate of his sister Shalom. Lavos, the game's main antagonist, who awakens and ravages the world in 1999 AD, is an extraterrestrial parasitic creature that harvests DNA and the Earth's energy for its own growth. Thank you everyone for watching. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you all in the next one.